Welcome to the Create Podcast, where we believe your whole life is a canvas and you have the power to create anything you desire. I am your host, Ekaterina Popova, artist, master coach, founder of Create Magazine, and most importantly, your biggest cheerleader. Each week, I'll bring you inspiring conversations, tips, and tools to help you grow your career, expand your vision, and build a joyful, sustainable practice doing what you love on your own terms. Let's dive in. Most artists wait for the art world to invite them in. Daniel Arsham stopped waiting. He got a house in Miami, built his own gallery at 21, and spent years showing up until a Paris gallery finally said yes. Today on the Create Podcast, Daniel and I chat about his brand new book, Future Relic, written for his 17-year-old self, who dreamed of being an artist with a capital A but had no idea how to make it happen. We're covering why art schools teaches you to make the work but not build a career or business, how to walk into rooms where you feel like you don't belong, why nobody remembers your failures, so you might as well collect them, and how writing down ultra-specific goals actually makes them real. If you're ready to stop waiting for someone to hand you an art career and start building one yourself, this conversation is going to inspire you and show you how. Let's go ahead and dive in and chat with Daniel. Daniel, welcome to the Create Podcast. I am so excited to chat with you today, and I'm so impressed by your career and this book that I read from cover to cover. Congratulations and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
Yeah, so I'm really excited to chat with you because you start the book by talking a little bit about the quote unquote art world. And I'm sure, lots of artists are both enthralled by it and want to be a part of it, but also frustrated or intimidated by it. And I wanted to ask you early on, when you first realized that you wanted to be, like you say, an artist with a capital A, what was your relationship like with this art world, right? This fantasy that we have, and how did you approach it when you first started?
I went to art school since I was in really elementary school. So I kind of came up through this system, learning about art and studying it. And I went to college at, one of the premier art schools really in the world, Cooper Union in New York City. And I learned so much there about making and about thinking, right, related to our practice as artists. But I learned virtually nothing about how to apply those things to a career, how to build a life within that. And so, you kind of finish school, you have this moment of realization where how do I get a gallery? How do you get introduced to collectors? How do you build, a following for your work? And all of that had to be, invented by me on the fly. So, I certainly was aware of the machinery of the art world. Obviously, I studied art history, so I understood the relationship of artists and their benefactors going back really all the way to the Renaissance, when you had the church as a supporter of artists, you had, big wealthy families like the Medici family. And then in the 19th, system changed a little bit more to be galleries and salons. And that was really the first moment that gallerists themselves became part of this kind of ecosystem of supporting the production of artwork. And so when I finished college, I had this moment where, thinking about how can I meet a gallery? How can I meet somebody that will exhibit my work? And because I didn't have any direct relationship, I decided, you know what, I'm just going to start my own gallery. And I did that with a number of friends. It was a space in Miami called The House, which was literally built inside of our house. We gutted the first floor and turned the space into an exhibition space, and we lived upstairs. When I decided to start this gallery, it was right around the time that Art Basel was beginning in Miami. And so there was a lot of attention around what was happening there with younger artists. And I met Emmanuel Periton. I think it was through a museum director that had visited our exhibition space. And, I wanted more than anything in the world to exhibit my work. This was a gallery that was based in Paris. It was kind of this fantasy, to show. I was 21 years old when I met Emmanuel. It was another 4 years of kind of doing everything that I could to try to be to be present and to show my work to him and the people that were around him to convince him that, if I would be an artist that would be good in his gallery.
Yeah, I really enjoyed reading that part of the book as well. And, you were very young, but you were also very clear on what you wanted, which I think really helps because from my experience, sometimes, and I'm speaking for myself personally, and some of the artists that I talk with, on one hand, they might want to be part of the art world, but on the other hand, they maybe have some negative feelings about it, or maybe it's like an insecurity. And I think there's a world where both can exist, right? There might not be, situations or practices that are favoring the art world, but yet there are good people who advocate for artists and want to see them win and want to support them. So one thing I want to go back to is you starting your own gallery, which I love so much. And I constantly talk about creating our own opportunities because that's really the best way to attract people to notice our work. I would love to hear how you came up with that idea and any other doors that creating your own exhibitions or a gallery space like that opened for you.
I mean, at the time, that felt like the biggest risk that I could take was to create an exhibition space for myself. And remember, this was 2003, so it was really before the era of social media. I think artists today have a lot more opportunities, right, to showcase their work to a larger audience with much more limited resources, right? We had to find a house, literally construct the walls in this house, gutting the first floor of this house, building walls, building a floor. We made it look as close to what our vision, a white box art gallery would be. And because we didn't have any relationships with other galleries or really understand how the art world functions, that was our understanding of how this could be done at that time.
One question I have for you now in 2026, what do you think the role of the gallery is? Because artists have so much opportunity to, build a presence, really run their own career, have direct collector relationships. But I think there is still room for the gallery. And I'm curious to hear what you think that is.
I think it's actually extremely important. And certainly, galleries have been around for a long time. And with the advent of Instagram and TikTok and all of these other ways of showing work, it's created a scenario where artists can have a more direct relationship with not only collectors, but curators who find work through that. I think the gallery, it presents a place where the type of person who's going to see that work is clearly somebody that's interested in many more artists than just the work that they're seeing at that moment, right? They may be familiar with the particular viewpoint of that dealer, right? Obviously, different galleries, they all have a kind of different, sense about the group of their artists. And, the gallery that represents me works with got to be over 50 artists at this point. And, there's a wide range of creativity within that. I think there's the opportunity to showcase your work in different, cities. Emmanuel has galleries in New York, Paris, London, Los Angeles, Hong Kong, Tokyo. It's really kind of global presence. And they also, early on, Emmanuel's relationship with me, and you read this in the book, was really as a kind of a foil against some of my instincts to want to be showing my work, wanting to be represented by a bigger gallery, wanting to, raise the prices of my work. And he was sort of a check on that and said, listen, you're 27 years old. You don't need to be having a solo exhibition in New York right now. We're going to keep the profile of your work, I wouldn't say limited, restrained, right? And we're going to allow your work to grow over time. We're going to allow you to make mistakes. We're going to allow you to fail and do that in a way that's going to increase not only the ideas and the thought process behind your work, but also the intrinsic value in it.
When making decisions, when you were young at the time and you had this kind of mentorship figure through your gallery, but if you were to go back or even today, when you're making a decision on what opportunity to take, there is such a thing as too much, right? How do you make decisions on what is going to add to your career or the depth of your work versus what's going to kind of distract or take away? Is there a certain question you ask yourself, or how do you approach this?
I mean, at this point, it's somewhat intuition. And I would say generally I err on the side of restraint, right? If I think that if I question something a little bit too much, maybe there's something in it that I need to resolve before I'm willing to show it out in the world. This is not only a question of who you're working with in terms of galleries or collaborators, but also choices that you make in your own practice. And there's plenty of works, and I talk about this a lot in the book, that never made it out of the studio. There are things experiments that I made that sit around in the studio, and I don't throw them away. I keep them, and that might be something that I return to 5 years later, a decade later. There's a story in the book about a concept that I developed for a major exhibition in New York. I won't spoil it for people that want to read the book, but
Yeah.
a major exhibition in New York that I thought that I was going to be invited to be in. And in the end, didn't end up in that exhibition. And a decade later, that concept was used in a very prominent place that was adjacent to the art world, but kind of outside of it. And that's another thing when we talk about the art world, I feel that especially when we're in school, students, we imagine it as this kind of collective groupthink that these people all have a direct relationship and they're coordinating efforts. It's really not like that. It's really decisions of individuals, and the rules within it are somewhat non-existent, right? It's everyone following rules that they believe to be in place, which sometimes are enforced, and other times, you're able to play outside the boundaries of that. I've done that very heavily with the collaborative work that I've done with brands ranging from Adidas to Dior, Tiffany, things that the capital A art world in some cases frowns upon, but in many cases in the past has also supported that kind of activity with artists like Warhol, who very much was working within the commercial universe, the pop cultural world.
I wonder if you have any tips for artists who might really feel resistance. I'm not saying everyone has to go down this path, but there are more business-sided projects that can support our practice that don't put pressure on the sale of our work, especially as we're building our, the meaningful work that we want to show in a museum setting, let's say. Do you have any advice for how to reframe it or to approach it without feeling like you're quote unquote selling out, which I hate that, but it comes up a lot in our community?
I mean, listen, at the end of the day, if you're able to create a scenario that allows your work to be not only seen, but allows you to remain creative, I would choose that anytime over taking a job that is distracting. I talk about this a little bit in the book where, by the time I was 28, 29, I had already shown in Paris. I was represented by Emmanuel Perrotin. My work was in major collections, but I was still effectively broke. And there's this feeling of I feel like I've gotten to this place that I should be, quote unquote successful. And it required me to continue to work in that way without any real assurance that I was going to achieve, the level that I have today. And some of that was the willingness to collaborate with larger companies that funded parts of my practice that didn't make money. And I'll give you an example. The first time that I worked with Adidas, this would have been 2013 or 2014. And, this was a time when I think Emmanuel and, other collectors of mine were very skeptical about me using my practice to collaborate in a commercial way like that, and said, why would you allow a brand to use your work to sell sneakers? And my position was, listen, I'm actually using their brand to fund this incredible sculptural process that I want to develop. I created a film out of that, which had very little to do with the branding aspect. And the other aspect of it that I didn't initially realize, but that became such an interesting part of working with brands in that way, is that it reaches people that are not part of the art world, that are not looking to find art. And I think some of the most impactful places that you can show artwork and create your vision is in places where people don't expect to see art, right?
I love that.
When we walk into a gallery or a museum, we kind of know the context, and we know I'm going to see things that were produced as an artwork. And when we encounter things, let's say public sculpture or artwork that's in a context outside of that, it's a very different way of viewing it.
Yeah. I absolutely love that. Thank you so much for sharing. In my personal life, I find that when I put myself out of my comfort zone, and you write about this in a book too, which I want to ask you, for example, going to an event or a panel or a party where I know there's going to be people, quote unquote, out of my league or out of my industry, but have the potential to connect me to opportunities that I'm, looking for. Early on, when you first started to be in rooms with such people, and you write about, some of these celebrity encounters and meeting Pharrell and working together, do you have any tips for how to overcome like this massive imposter syndrome one might have, or, trying not to put anyone on a pedestal while still obviously showing them respect, and how to be part of these bigger circles that artists aren't naturally exposed to?
Yeah, I think for me, the idea of confidence in those spaces was putting on an act of confidence, right? There's nobody in that room that is not feeling a similar feeling, that is totally confident in the way that they enter the room, the way that they're going to engage with people. And, it's the same today in some ways. I've done talks in front of 1,000 people, and I constantly have to convince myself over and over again. And it doesn't necessarily get any easier that I'm supposed to be there, that the ideas that I'm presenting are interesting. And, I talk about this in the book a little bit. And part of that is tricking yourself into believing enough that you can push through that moment, but making things that you feel you want to see exist in the world, and then trusting and hoping that other people will share that as well.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I love that. Absolutely. We'll get back to our conversation in just a moment, but first, I want to thank our sponsors. This episode of the Create Podcast is sponsored by Create Magazine, our international platform and magazine connecting contemporary artists with curators, galleries, and a global audience. Explore our print and digital issues, exhibitions, open calls, and free resources for artists, or submit your work by going to createmagazine.co. We're also supported by Create You, our online learning platform. Inside, you'll find micro courses and step-by-step instructions to help you grow your career, learn new art skills, expand your audience, or master sales with confidence. Get started today by going to createyou.co. All right, now let's get back to the show. Now, I want to ask you about, and you're right about this a lot as well, failure and kind of making friends with it in your career and what that looks like today. Because I think early on, before you have quote unquote anything to lose, it's a little bit easier to just, make a big mess and try things. But is it different now that you've had success and you've had achieved a lot of your goals and dreams?
Yeah, become a much better editor and become much more willing to try a lot of things as my career and my practice has developed. But a lot of people who see my work today and really who look at and pay attention to the universe that I've built, they only see it in this moment, right? They see the kind of finality of it, and they've missed all of the failures. And one of the kind of superpowers that I found is that nobody remembers the failures, right?
Mm-hmm.
They failed for a reason and they kind of disappear. So collect those failures, be willing to actually push towards them. And the more failures that you're able to kind of achieve, both in, let's say, the creation of artwork, right? Ideas that you have for a work that either through some material quality or just conceptually, they don't actually land for you in the end, as well as, trying to create an exhibition in, a certain museum or applying for, a certain position and failing at that. The more of those things you collect, the odds of you succeeding at a certain percentage of them go way up. And that's, it's a very simple idea, but it's kind of a superpower to be willing to fail that much over a long period of time with no real assurance that those things are going to come to fruition. But it's really just math, right? The more times that you try to do these things, eventually, just percentage wise, just odds, it's based idea, some of them are going to be successful. And the ones that are successful are the ones that are going to stand out and are going to be the ones that people see and remember.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And it's true. And neutralizing it as well, not making it mean something that it's, is going to affect the rest of your life. A lot of times it becomes a great story, like you share your mentor notes, which I'll ask you about without giving anything away. Other thing I wanted to ask you is, how do you approach goal setting or dreaming or, manifesting, however way you look at it? Do you have a certain ritual that you do, or do you just have like a big list of goals that you want to achieve while you're on this earth? Curious to hear your thoughts.
I mean, very early on, and I don't really know exactly where this concept came from, but I wrote everything down. I wrote down all the things that I wanted to achieve and as clear as I could be. Because if you can't really see, the end goal, okay, I want to be an artist exhibiting. Where do you want to be showing? What kind of work do you want to be making? What do you want your life to look like? I think you need to be ultra specific about those things. There's an honesty about that with yourself where you say, these are actually the things that I want in my life, and more simple things like, this is the type of work that I want to be making. Without identifying those things specifically, I think hard to achieve them, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. That actually was really helpful for me as well. And a lot of the things I wrote down came true pretty quickly. Some of them might, might take a few decades, but some of the initial ones, I was really surprised. And I remember I'm like, oh my gosh, I wrote this exact thing down. And it's crazy how it works. But I think it just gives us clarity so that we can filter through the noise and make decisions better. So I love that. Thank you for sharing that. One other thing I wanted to ask you is how do you deal with criticism or, in this day of social media, there might be comments or noise, and obviously you have experienced so much success and you achieved so much, but does it ever bother you, or how do you deal with like naysayers?
Well, the easiest way to think about this, and this is a question for everyone listening, is do you like everything that you see in the art world? And you'd be lying if you say that you did. So there's no way that everyone is going to like the things that I put out into the world. If they did, they'd be lying, and the work would probably be too simple, right? Too basic. And so I sort of lean into a little bit of that, that dichotomy between people really liking it, getting behind the work, and then people hating on it. And I sort of feel like you need a little bit of both.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it is really interesting as well. And one of my goals was early on to look at the art world objectively and try to find things, even in the work that I don't resonate with, that I either respect or can learn from, and just to understand that some people aren't willing to do that. But I love that so much. Well, Daniel, this has been such a pleasure. And I'm so excited for everyone to pick up a copy of your book. I have this reader copy. Can you tell us, who is this book for? What is your intention for it? And what do you hope the readers get out of it?
I started writing this book during 2020, like pandemic lockdown in New York, had a lot more time thinking to myself. And the way that I wrote this book was actually speaking it. So the vast majority of the book was me, doing voice notes and talking and collecting all of this. And it was really written for the 17-year-old version of myself, right? The kid who had all of these dreams of being an artist and not really knowing how it would work. I unpack a lot of things in the book that are very basic ideas that I've learned along the way. And I think when people are reading them, they actually seem quite obvious once you understand them, but difficult to get to that. I unpack a lot of the kind of mythology around the art world and how that works, around massive failures and successes that I've had, and sort of just the way that I navigated through the art world with a kind of unconventional career as we related to other artists today.
I love that so much. And this book will be available everywhere, I'm assuming, where books are sold.
Yes.
By the time this episode comes out, it should already be out. And anything else you have going on? Where can people see your work? What else do you have happening?
Yeah, so the book is coming out concurrent with a major exhibition I'm having in New York, which opens March 5th at Gallery Periton. So depending on when this airs, it'll either be already open or just opening. And that exhibition is kind of a culmination of many different ideas. I'm toying with the title of the show being just various thoughts. In many of the past exhibitions, I've had a very focused, singular, let's say, body of work that I've shown. And I've separated that, like, I'm going to do, a specific body of work at the show in Paris and another one in London. This show is, the works were produced over the last, say, 2 years, and some of them are very different from the other ones. So I think it's, an interesting way for an audience to see kind of all of the universe of things that's going on in my studio and in my mind.
Well, I'm so looking forward to checking it out. And thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and for writing this amazing book. And congratulations to you on everything. And thank you so much for being on the show.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks so much for tuning in to the Create Podcast. If today's episode resonated with you, may I ask a small favor? Please leave us a review on iTunes and share the show with a friend. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss a single conversation. You can learn more by going to createmagazine.co, join our community, and read new articles on our Substack, createmagazine.substack.com, and connect with us daily on our Instagram @createmagazine. Thank you so much for supporting the show, and we'll see you on the next episode.